What's going on now?
That's what's streaming.
Okay, it says going live. Preparing to live stream this meeting. Excellent. Last time this went wrong and I had to get headphones on again. So great. There we are, the wonders of technology. Kate, welcome. It's great to have you here for another Parenting in Lockdown from St Diana's here in London. And of course, we're old friends and both co-directors of the Mind and Soul Foundation. It's wonderful to have you back. How are you doing?
Absolutely. It's good to be with you. I'm good. We are on a household countdown to the end of homeschooling. So I have to confess, I haven't stuck a chart on the wall, but I'm quite tempted so I can take the days off.
It's always darkest before the dawn, though, don't you find? I find it's like one of those dreams when you're running really slowly and you can't quite get your limbs in motion. So I just feel like we're sort of, straining towards the end, but it still feels like a bit of a slog. Last couple of weeks, though.
Yeah, well, I lost my head completely one of the days this week and uploaded all the wrong day's work to the wrong day on Google Classroom. So I had a slightly snarky message from the teacher about that. So I need to get back on my game.
You need to get back on your game, Kate. I had to send the teacher an email today about the orthodontist appointment. I felt slightly guilty. There was actually an orthodontist appointment, but I felt like I was kind of skiving off school. So, it's a classic time, isn't it?
In better news, child number one had an exam today, a test on the Christian faith for philosophy, and she came top. So I feel like I've had an impact. It's all good.
It's so good. Pastors' kids, it's that whole thing, isn't it?
Religious studies. She had a faint advantage.
I keep saying to my number one, you've got to take religious studies. Religious studies is a guaranteed A, darling. So we're in the back room there peddling that. This is the fourth and final one of these I think that we're going to be doing because this lockdown is, praise God, as we said, coming towards an end. And tonight I wanted just to talk a little bit. Well, we're going to go on quite a wide-ranging ramble. Hopefully that will be engaging for people at home or wherever they are. But we want to talk a little bit about unlockdown because that's quite a phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, I was thinking about what it would be like to go back into church with several hundred people and what an experience that would be.
Yeah,
it's actually slightly terrifying. I mean, I'm excited because I'm an extrovert, but I'm also slightly terrified. And then thinking about children, particularly my daughter number one, she's been locked in her room. Well, I didn't obviously lock her in her room, but she's locked in her room and she's focused to her computer sort of 6 or 7 hours a day on her own. How's she going to cope with going back into a classroom filled with children?
Yeah, and I think for all of us, it's really important to recognize that's a thing. This has been a year, even for us adults, that is a long enough period in our minds that we have built new habits. We've got used to something different. So even though we're returning to normal, that is going to be an adjustment. And I don't know about you, Will, but I've had a lot of people the early part of this week since Monday's announcement who have been actually quite anxious and saying, I know I'm supposed to feel really happy and everybody's really happy, but actually I feel dread, or I'm not sure about going back, or how am I going to cope with this? So I think we've all got to cut ourselves a bit of slack and recognize it will be a gradual thing. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly everything has returned to normal. Yeah. And that will help us. But for kids and teenagers particularly, at least for us as adults, we have had, let's just say several decades of the previous normal. So we have something that's much more established that we're going back to. Obviously, the younger you get with children, the more this is the case. But for them, it really is adjusting to another new season. Yeah. And so we've got to bear that in mind, really.
I think that's really, really helpful because I get a bit strung up about it, but I forget how flexible our children actually are.
Yeah.
And how much better they're probably coping than I'm coping. And for my youngest, he's 4. This whole process has been like a quarter of his life. I think 25% of his life has been spent in lockdown. That's a bit depressing. But actually, for him, a lot of this stuff is normal. The language is normal. Lockdown is normal. The reality of this situation is all quite normal to him. And other changes will also be relatively normal for him.
Yeah.
So I've got to get my head around that.
2 things. I mean, children don't have a lot of the anguish that we hold as adults, because it is so abnormal to us. And we had all the hopes and dreams for our children and our young people. Young people, as they get older, they're struggling with that more. But also children in particular, they take their cues from us. It's like being on a plane, as long as the steward and the stewardess is looking, right? You're reasonably calm. So where we've managed well on the whole, our kids have managed well. Where it's been hard for them is where we've been struggling, because many of us as parents have hit overwhelm. We've had moments of losing it because we're just human. And that's where it's been hardest for them, because that's when it impacts them the most.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's that face, isn't it? I've done the whole like anguish face of, and they're like, Dad, what's the matter? What's happening? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's okay. It's everything is going to be okay. And they're looking at me thinking, he doesn't think it's going to be okay. Panic stations, like help, what's going on? And utterly terrifying. So that is the nightmare that we have been living with. It's the parental giveaway of like, I'm not sure we're coping with this. I don't think this is going particularly well.
And I guess with teenagers and that older age group, we're kind of, I love teenagers. I've always loved working with teenagers, and everybody always said to me, "Oh, wait till your own kids are teenagers." But I'll be honest with you, I still love teenagers. I just think it's the best age. I love parenting teens, but the challenge is you're dealing with all your own reactions, and you've also dealing with theirs, and they're kind of adult, but kind of not as well. So you're helping them manage how they're reacting and responding, because everything in the teenage years is about learning. Every moment is learning what it means to be an adult, how to hold things well, how to react and respond well. So it's kind of exciting if you're a psychologist like me, but there's never a dull moment. And I guess in lockdown, some of us probably would like, well, not some dull moments, it's all quite dull, but you know what I mean? So a moment where there's a bit less demand on us.
and so if we're thinking about this whole idea of actually, okay, let's talk about preparing for unlock. But the first point might be that we can overestimate how catastrophic this is, because we ourselves are quite anxious about unlocking as adults, and our children might be more flexible. I think managing
your own response is a good place to start, isn't it? And as parents, we think too much sometimes about our kids and forget ourselves. But if you're freaking out, if you're overwhelmed, if you're exhausted, you're not going to support them well. So it's a good place to start.
And then thinking about sort of, in this period, in this sort of next couple of weeks, we've got sort of 2.5 weeks until they do go back to school. Can you give us some ideas about, are there any exercises we could do with the children about kind of socialization, or at least preparing them for the steps forward, that anyone could do? I mean, I'm starting the conversations of, have you thought about what it would feel like to be back in a classroom of kids again? Or is there anything you're worried about with, and responses I'm currently getting are, no, Dad, it's going to be amazing. I can't wait. Which makes me feel a little bit sad, because we've all been together like Swiss Family Robinson here and having a wonderful time. But is there anything on your mind? Anything we can do to sort of prep the kids for this return to the classroom?
I think the main thing is to have the conversations, but to try and do that as much as possible, not in a very emotive, very anxious or loaded way. So doing it in whatever works for your household, in a space that's relaxed. So particularly with older kids and teens, trying to avoid anything that's too intense. So as adults, to have a conversation, we like to sit down face to face, it's the Spanish Inquisition, let's talk. And the kids are like, no way, are you kidding me? Think about something where you're not face to face with them. I mean, let's face it, we're doing a lot of walks at the moment. That's quite a good place to have a conversation. You're side by side, things like that are a bit less pressed. Or even, text. If you ever text your kids, I text my kids perhaps more than I should, but think about those spaces where you can have less intense conversations. For younger kids, it might be sitting down and doing some drawing and saying, oh, why don't we draw school? And it's amazing how when kids start drawing, that can create like a hook you can hang a conversation on. Ask them what they're drawing, why they're drawing it like that, and use that as a way to start the conversation. or role play some of it out. Like I know with my son, we went out on a walk the other day for a bit of a half-term quiz that one of the other parents had set up, which was very awesome. Clearly a higher achieving parent than me.
You really are achieving.
But yeah, so we went out and we were walking past his school, and it occurred to me, I was saying, oh, this is the walk we normally do to school, isn't it, mate? But we've not done this for a long time. How does it feel? Does it feel weird? And then we got to chatting. I was like, how do you think it will feel when you go back to school, like on that first morning, you know? And we talked through it. And we walked past school, and I was like pointing out bits of school to me, and just using some of those visual cues for him to start thinking, well, what will it be like? And it's anything like that helps them process without being like really emotionally triggered. That will help them think it through and be a bit more prepared for the moment when it happens. You're trying to avoid them feeling like ambushed in a moment where they suddenly think, oh my goodness, I'm going back to school. And so that you're preparing them for it and setting a good narrative, a good story that's not positive in a way that we just deny that there's anything that might be difficult or challenging or new, but that's realistic in a helpful, sort of secure feeling way. So we can talk about things like, oh, it might be a bit strange to see people who you've not seen for a bit. How do you think you're going to handle that? And talking through some of these things and helping give a set of stories so they can imagine a good outcome to things.
That's a brilliant idea. I definitely am going to take my kids on that daily exercise, the dry run to school.
Strolling past school is such a good thing to do, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea, especially that's something we can definitely do like within the context of our daily exercise over the next couple of weeks. And I think the whole process of sort of doing the drive by or doing the walk by is a really good way of starting the conversation. So that's a great idea, Kate.
And it's great to do the positive and negative, you know, to talk about the balance of these moments. So you can say like, oh, what are you looking forward to about going back to school? But then don't be afraid to say, is there anything that you're not sure about or anything that you're worried about? You know, sometimes as parents, we don't like to talk about our kids' anxieties because we're afraid we'll make them worse. But when we don't talk about them, the message our kids get is like, oh my goodness, this is really bad, because like mum or dad, they won't even talk about it. So actually it's really important to talk about the things that our kids are perhaps nervous or worried about, and like I say, then to try and give them a narrative, a framework to understand those things that isn't as scary. So having the conversation is a really good thing to do.
I did a bit of I'm not sure if it was a parenting fail or a parenting win today, which was I'm trying to do the back to school thing. Do you remember, you know, at the start of September term, that's when you buy the new pencil case and you get the new shoes and everything like that. So I blew a bit of cash today, if I'm honest. And I did the whole, you know, buy a new backpack for school and also new school shoes and a school coat for one of the children. So I said they could have something new, like each of them could have something new for school. So we're trying to build that whole, you know, I've got a new rubber, a ruler and pencil case, and it's all nice. It's all good. So
you are on it, Will. I only today have just realised that for the second time running, I bought a load of new school kit for my son, and then there was a lockdown, and now none of it is going to fit him because the child has done nothing but grow for a year. So I am panicking and online ordering like school trousers.
Yeah, I feel your pain. Well, the shoes was a necessity because we got the shoes.
Shoes. You see, you mentioned shoes. I'm not sure he's worn shoes for 6 weeks apart from his walking boots. So I should check that.
It's worth checking the school shoes because actually, child number one's
where they are.
Yeah, these are good tips for parents. Get your kids' school kit together. Get their shoes out.
Have you seen your child's school bag for 6 weeks?
I mean, it's so long. Like my daughter, I think my daughter broke up in December, you know, started in December, whatever. And obviously now we'll be in mid-March by the time she goes back. So things change. Anyway, there are a few ideas. If we're going to, you know, we've talked a bit about parental anxiety, and actually that is also pretty hot on the whole unlock thing. It was quite funny. I said to a few people, I was going to do a session with you on helping our children with unlockdown, and they started saying things like, can we have an adult session on unlockdown? And I was like, well, I mean, why don't we spend a bit of time talking about it? Because the school gates are a bit of an anxious point for parents, aren't they? And the drop-offs, particularly parents of younger children who have to all crowd around the sort of school gates and, you know, be there to receive their children. And just a bit of anxiety, I think, around how many children are gathering all in one space. Obviously, most of us who've got school age children are in our 40s and early 50s, so we're unlikely to have had our jabs yet either.
No, we are the unvaccinated remainder.
That's a terrible title. We are the unvaccinated remainder. Ah, no.
I know.
It sounds awful.
And all of our parents and our more senior relatives are all, it's like the tables have turned. I'm thinking of sending my mum to do my supermarket shopping. I don't know about you.
That's a great idea. Mine's about 200 miles away, so that's not very helpful. But yeah, I mean,
let's talk about memes for a minute, Will. Now, okay. I know memes, everybody now just thinks of those little videos that go around social media, but in psychological terms, a meme is a packet of information that as human beings we spread because we find it interesting. So we share it and we remember it and we pass it on. Obviously, these days we do that on social media, but the Schoolgate is another great example of where we share memes. And some pieces of information just get shared more than others, and they spread more. They spread on social media. They go viral, unfortunate phrase these days. But we know that the capacity for some pieces of information to they catch something, and therefore they spread really well. Now, what we also know is that negative stories spread better, negative memes. One of the reasons is that anxiety is your brain's way of making sure that something stays near the surface of your memory. So if you've heard something and it's made you a bit anxious, you're more likely to remember it and share it with someone else. And all of this means that when you get together with lots of other people, I mean, we've all done it because we've basically got nothing else to talk about because we've not done much else for months. But you get together and everybody's like, oh, did you see? Oh, I read this and I've read this and I've read that. And did you read that story about? And that's what we do, isn't it? So what we need to do is recognize that in those moments, we are only hearing a small proportion of the stories, and we're only hearing the more negative ones. Very, very often the positive stories, which are hopefully in most circumstances the bigger percentage, are not the ones that are shared. So I think we've got to remember that. And if you know you struggle a bit with anxiety, be kind to yourself. Can you protect yourself from some of those conversations? It's like we've had to do that with media, haven't we? Sometimes just turn off the radio. Although I will tell you a funny parenting story. My son overheard Radio 4 this morning talking about summer school for kids who've got behind through homeschooling. We have never had such a good day on homeschooling because he was suddenly super. He's like, they're going to send me to school in the summer. I'm like, yeah, if they think you work hard enough. But, sometimes negative stories are good. But just like we've had to be careful with our consumption of media, let's be careful about those conversations. Maybe we need to agree like a COVID-free conversation zone.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Talk about other stuff those first few days. And that will help us to manage our anxiety. Be careful about what you're reading. Be careful about what you're consuming. Remember, on social media, again, the stories that spread are the negative ones, the anxiety-provoking ones. The ones that say, actually, maybe it will all be fine are not there. Now, look, having said that, I know there is some genuine stuff that we do need to think about and process, but let's just be wise about how we do it.
Really, really helpful, Kate. I think I've seen that, the sort of the Schoolgate, obviously the masks experience and going back to all of that. And I think that the sort of, the need to avoid escalating. I think if we all took responsibility for de-escalating the scare stories, then we'd have a happier time at the Schoolgate. Thinking about younger children again, and a bit about this catch-up. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. I was thinking about that a little earlier on. The whole sort of fear factor about not about COVID, but about the classroom again, and am I going to be left behind is quite a common theme for children at the moment. I mean, I found that particularly in the sort of middle age, in the sort of central band, the ones who are kind of coming towards changing schools, am I going to get left behind? I guess because their experience has been that they've been isolated from everyone else. They can't see all of the other children also all struggling in their own bedrooms with their home learning.
Yeah.
So, it's become quite an isolated thing.
They've experienced what many of us have experienced too, which is when you're working from home, when you're working in a way that's very monotonous, your brain does start to struggle, your concentration drops, but also your perception of what you're doing gets blurred. So it feels like you're much more effective, much less effective than normal. But that's because you've forgotten what normal is like. Like normal work is people interrupting you, or you're going to make a cuppa, or, you know, you're not working all the time. But when you're at home and you're on your own in a room, you feel like that's what you should be able to maintain. And so the risk is you feel like you're doing really badly, but you're not. It's just that your expectation is in the wrong place. So I think young people in particular, they've had that problem too. You know, they've been slogging away on their own, and it's just tough on their minds. But most of I remember school. Most of my school day was not spent working.
No.
Less of my class time than the teachers would have liked was spent working, to be honest.
It's funny. I think that's exactly right. That actually you can't benchmark your outworking, because actually, you know, you're so isolated and insulated. I had a conversation just recently with a student who has been working extremely hard on their own, and they've become extremely anxious about the quality of their work and overworking. And I said, the fact is, you know, you haven't got
cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, you haven't got John in your dorm room lying there at sort of 1:30 in the afternoon, still asleep, you know, and whilst you're at your computer thinking, actually, I'm doing pretty well here. When, you know, at the moment, you just got no idea of the scale or the context of your activity. So you might be doing badly, or you might be doing really, really well. But either way, you don't know. And that's really challenging. I think for kids, that's been slightly fueled as well by the memes, by the positive memes of like, here I am in my school uniform doing brilliantly, you know, whilst, you know, other kids are maybe finding that a little bit harder.
That, and of course, all the negativity that they have heard about, kids are failing, kids aren't doing well. You know, my son's school sent a very robust email today saying there will be no summer school because the kids have been working. Please tell your child they've done great. Don't worry about what they're hearing on the news, you know. And I might not share that straight away with my son, because motivation isn't a bad thing. But I really like that they sent that, you know, because the stories that our children are hearing on the news are very negative and anxiety provoking, but they're not, or for the vast majority of them, they're not truth.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been trying incredibly hard and have done just amazing. You know, I'm so proud, particularly of some of the teenagers and young people, the stories that I'm hearing of what they've done and how they've sustained themselves and how focused they've been, because it's been really tough. And I know that as an adult, I found it tough. So I just think they've done amazingly well.
We've got to clap them. My son, he's taken to baking, and I mean, nice. his mood's actually been quite low the last couple of weeks, and I've been a bit worried about that. But it's been quite interesting to see how the kind of creative expression has come to the fore. Just before this call, I was tucking into some of his sourdough bread, or what was that? You know, I'm not sure it was sourdough, but it was a fantastic loaf, hand baked. Yeah, so something exciting going on there. But I mean, I'm proud of them. I think they've done incredibly well. They're doing incredibly well.
I think it's important that our kids know that they have learned and discovered things about themselves and their character that is as important as academic stuff. You know, we know statistically that in this current culture, for a lot of kids, the thing that's more likely to limit them and limit their potential and their success in life, it's not academic success, it's not grades, it is how well can they manage tough times, how well do they deal with stress, can they manage anxiety and some of the challenges of 21st century living. And some of them have learned some amazing things in this season about how to do that, and they've discovered capacity and courage and creativity in themselves, which I think will last them through life. And we know that research looking at previous generations who've grown up in tough times, actually, on the whole, they're not destroyed by that experience. It does make them more resourceful and more able because of what they've learned. So if we can reinforce that with our kids and make sure that they realize just how amazing these things are, like, gosh, teenagers, they don't realize, some of them, how brilliant some of the stuff they're doing is. So we need to tell them that, because the more they can have confidence in their own ability, the more that they will be able to then harness that potential into whatever the next seasons bring for them, just the normal challenges of adult life. Because there's always storms, isn't there? There's always difficulty.
So helpful. I mean, that's a key point, I think, in terms of preparing them for going back. It's saying, actually, you've not been left behind. I think a lot of their mentality is like, I've been off sick and everyone else has still been meeting, that kind of feeling. It's about sort of saying, actually, this is like being a 6 months of study skills development, which I didn't have. I don't know about you. I mean, I remember laughing in study skills. but actually
self-motivation.
yeah, resilience, creativity, following instructions, not needing parental reinforcement.
I was talking to my son just this week and saying, like, mate, you've got so much better at dealing with frustration. And I was like, because we've hated it, but we have all been very frustrated this year. And actually, I see the difference in you. You've got much better. When you get frustrated, you hold it better. You're a bit calmer. You're more able to say, I just need a minute, mummy. And I was like, that's really good. So we can look for the little signs in our kids of things that they've learned, not just academic stuff, but wider things. That it's like Romans 5 for people from a church background. This is Paul talking to the early church about seasons in life when we're forced to endure under tough times. And he says it refines our character, which I know my daughter says it's really annoying when I go on about things being character building, but that's him saying it, not me. But he's right. Tough times, that we don't enjoy them, but they have the potential to release something in us, because we have to dig deep, don't we? And we discover things about ourselves that we never realized.
Yeah, and I'm also excited on that level that the sort of slingshot reality of young people post-COVID will be quite dynamic. So yes, it's suppressed their academic achievement for this season universally, but actually the skills that they have done, the resilience that they have got, the curiosity and the courage that they have developed will actually accelerate their learning out of this season. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to be curious about what might happen in the future to this generation who've experienced these really challenging things.
Yeah, and I mean, this has challenged some of the most basic foundational things about how we do life as humanity. And I think that generation, I'm excited by what they will do with that, because they are more flexible, things are more up for grabs than them, they're more creative, more willing to give new things a try. And I think, like you say, coming out of this, their attitudes to their future, they're going to shake things up a bit. And now, of course, in all of this, Will, I'm really aware that we're talking about the majority of kids. There will be a group of children and young people who have really struggled in this season because their circumstances have been really difficult. And like in most things, the vulnerable are the ones who will struggle the most. And so I guess we do have to be aware that there is a sector of children and young people who will need more support and who will have struggled more. But again, that doesn't mean that they're doomed because of this experience. It's about us recognizing the need that they have and supporting them and making sure that they can connect with that support and do whatever they need to do. But I think, like you say, it's not all about academic stuff.
Yeah, and it's also not about the press headlines. This is about our own individual children. And sometimes the splashy headlines, like you mentioned earlier, the big memes are mental health epidemic unfolds amongst young people. Quite a few people have asked me about that headline recently. I'm like, look, yes, there's a higher prevalence of anxiety as you'd expect in an international pandemic, but because we're going through this experience does not mean every child under the age of 18 is going to develop an anxiety disorder. So there's something very sort of frightening, I think, for parents and for children about hearing that, because it's almost like a virus in itself. It's like, am I going to catch whatever it is? You're like, no, it doesn't work like that.
And I think that's really important, because in mental health terms, our ability to hold difficult emotions without fear or guilt is so important, because otherwise you take the thing you're feeling anyway and then you add fear or guilt into the mix and it just makes it worse. And most of what people are feeling right now it's biology. It's normal, healthy human reactions to an abnormal situation. And actually what we need to do, therefore, is approach that as calmly as we can and think, well, it's almost like, how do we fight biology with biology? How do we deal with that? How do we manage it? How do we sustain ourselves? And not label ourselves and panic and think, well, this is it. This is a sign that I'm weak, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or whatever it is. But just say, this is a sign that I'm human and this is a tough moment. So what do I need to do to help myself get through? And I think for our teenagers, we need to talk to them. I would say to parents out there, we do need to talk to them about the headlines that they're seeing, because otherwise the risk is that when they feel normal anxiety, they do think, I have an anxiety disorder, I'm ill, this is it, the rest of my life is doomed. And actually that's not necessarily the case. Even if they're really struggling, we can say, look, maybe this season has pushed you into some stuff that's really hard, but let's get you some help so you can work out how to manage that and come through it. Because you and I both know, Will, that to have struggles with mental health, to have moments where that sort of stuff becomes really difficult, can be part of a normal life story for people. And we don't want young people to just label themselves and think, well, that's it, my life is over now.
Yeah, there's something really disempowering about that, isn't it? In terms of something's happened to me, as in COVID, and now my life is ruined. And I think there's a danger of almost creating a sort of superscript around like the absolute eventuality, you know, that I'm promising myself this is going to be a bad story. And so we've got to be careful about that bias to the negative and actually say, look, everyone's working out a unique story in the context of something which we are all experiencing. So there's that sort of that your story is still your story. And actually, there isn't anything impositional here that is going to dictate exactly what happens to you or your mental emotional health. Everyone is unique, and their responses to each trauma and challenge are also unique.
Yeah, and I think the question is for our kids and our young people, are we helping them to shape their experience into a story that's about helplessness or a story about what helps? And I think helplessness is a victim-based thing. It's about this thing happened, I had no control over it, it destroyed my life, and there's nothing I can do. And there's a real risk. That's like our default if we're not careful, because we haven't learned that there is stuff we can do. Even in a situation like this where so much is out of our control, there's always things that we can do to improve our situation, to make good choices, to support ourselves, to be self-compassionate, all of those things. So we can help our young people learn how to think like that and to think, well, yeah, today's a rubbish day, but what shall we do to try and lift our mood? How shall we try and drop our stress level? What can we do to make a better chance that you'll sleep well tonight? You know, things like that are about stories that are more about how can we help ourselves? How can we help other people?
Really helpful. Kate, one of the questions that I can come back to me quite a few times with for young people, particularly and teenagers specifically, is about their friendship groups. So if there's an area of anxiety that I've noticed significantly in that age bracket, it's like, actually, are my friends still going to be my friends since I haven't seen them for so long? And also, I noticed that a number of friendship groups have changed dynamic because some people relate well online and other people just don't relate well online.
Isn't that interesting?
Can we speak a bit into that about the anxiety around actually how can we support our children into their friendships again? And what should we be expecting in terms of the dynamic between friendship groups going back, if we can?
And this is so interesting again for all of us. Like if we were chatting about adults and thinking, well, what's going to be one of the biggest challenges in Unlock for adults, I would say actually some issues, some decisions, and some reassessing around friendships is going to occupy us more than we expect, because this has really shaken everything up. And there's this universal phenomenon that's been called friendship funneling, which has described how under this season of greater pressure on relationships, we've all narrowed who we've kept in touch with and just limited it to the bare essential people. And for some of us, that's got so narrow that actually we've got people who depend on us. We don't have a choice about that. That's all the energy we've got. And we've basically not been able to keep in touch with anyone else. And that's not a decision about value. It's a decision about the circumstances and the limits of your capacity. Now, take all of that and then put that into the mind of an adolescent. First of all, we might talk younger kids in a minute. Now, for adolescents, one of their jobs in adolescence as their brain matures and becomes more adult is to learn how to do adult relationships and friendships. So those friendship and relationship social spaces are incredibly important, but also incredibly emotionally triggering for them. So they carry this greater power. So everything that we're going to experience as adults is just bigger for them. So I totally agree with everything you said. And chatting to young people, I'm hearing a lot of anxiety around that. Like, what's going to happen? I've made new friends, or I've lost touch with other people, or there was this person who, you know, everybody's reaction is different, isn't there? This person who was very anxious, so I lost touch with them, or there's so many dynamics there. I think as parents, what we can expect is an initial season where it's all just a bit chaotic, and the usual roller coaster, particularly for adolescents, of who's talking to who and who's had a row with who, and I hate this person, I need this person so much, I never want to see that person again. We can expect some of that. And again, what we can help our young people to do is to hold that without panic, without guilt, but just saying, give it some time, try not, you just deep breath, try and keep their stress level low. Because remember, when everybody's stress level is high, we're all more prickly, we're all more reactive. So those sort of disputes and disagreements and misunderstandings are more likely. So trying to encourage them all just to stay, to do the things they need to do to keep their stress level low, and give it some time to settle. And it will settle, and they'll get back to a more normal dynamic, although normal dynamics for some age groups in teenagers is always quite up and down.
Yeah, really, really helpful. And I guess as soon as we can, or are allowed to, trying to enable them to socialize in larger groups where they can be collective rather than individuals will be a good thing.
Yeah, and encouraging them to keep as broad as they can. So even now, I know that we're nearly at the end of this lockdown, but one of the things that we have been able to do as parents, and we can continue to do to support our children, is to encourage, where within the restrictions, those human connections. So whether that's online, whether it's one-to-one walks if they're old enough to do that, or, you know, kicking a ball around, or some of the things that they are allowed to do just one-to-one for their daily exercise. But encouraging them to try not to narrow it too much. So, you know, you have to be clever as a parent, don't you? Particularly with teenagers, because if they think you're pushing them towards something, you get the sort of donkey digging their heels in response, and you've suddenly made it less likely to happen. So you have to be quite cunning. But just dropping things into the conversation, like, oh, what about Alice? I haven't heard anything about her. How's she doing? You know, and just trying to edge them towards, like, oh yeah, I haven't spoken to her. I wonder how she is doing, and just trying to help them to keep their friendship sort of foundations broader, because that's better. So if all their eggs are in one basket in the teenage years, and that one basket happens to have a bad day, then it can feel very bad.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern to me, just because, you know, with my children, you know, they've tended to orientate themselves around one or other friend who they call every day, which is more intense than it should normally be. It's a very narrow funnel. I think as a result of this conversation, I'm going to encourage the older two to actually call all of their close friends in the build up to unlock, just to reconnect and say, how are you doing? I think that might be a helpful way of them almost doing some of the work of reconnecting in advance of time. That could be a strategy maybe to help them.
And where we can kind of make that fun or aid it, you know, like as soon as they're allowed to, like, when is it? It's from the same date that school start, isn't it? They're allowed to, for our older ones, to go and have a coffee or something. So I think where we can massage these things as parents, whether that's giving them money and saying, go and have a coffee with each one of your friends in the next 10 days, or whether it's about creating games and challenges, you know, like crazy scavengers Zoom hunts or something, and or heck, pay the money for them to do that escape room online, whatever it is that we can do to support and encourage those sorts of things. I think it's worth doing that right now, like you say.
Really, really helpful, Kate. It's such a weird thing. I mean, I sort of constantly pinch myself thinking, I can't believe we're having these conversations. Like, they are like these sort of deep conversations around our families and our circumstances in such a sort of universal way. We would have had these conversations, you know, a year ago in generality around teen mental health and well-being and young people, but it's such a specific and focused season. It's remarkable. I feel like we're having to learn so much so quickly and make so many adaptations all the time. And of course, everything's changing.
That's a good thing to talk about, Will, because I think so many people, I mean, in parenting, so often we're just worried about, you know, like, is this conversation the thing that's going to destroy my child's life for the rest of ever? You know, I always think, is this the thing that my children are going to tell their therapist when they're older, you know? But it isn't like that. It isn't like, like we get it right or wrong. So much of parenting is just muddling through. You know, my son said to me that he's like, Mom, what did you do when you was little and there was global pandemic? And I'm
Really?
like, mate, I have never done this before. And he's like, so you have no idea what you're doing? And I'm like, no, I am making all of this up. I say, I have a little skill and knowledge because of my job and my background, but I was like, no, as a parent, never done this before. Absolutely no, never homeschooled. I was saying when I was his age, I couldn't have imagined anything that could have shut schools. It was like that. It was just, I literally can't, I think I'm still struggling to believe it's happened.
I know, do you remember snow days? I mean, I remember like a
goodness.
snow day, like was like the absolute epic, that there would be a day off school, maybe once every 5 years, when the school would actually be shut for like one day. And you know, it's so hard to get your head around this reality and realize that we're all trying to work it through as we go along.
Yeah. And I think it's good to have those conversations with our kids. You know, it's good to show a bit of humanity with them and talk to them. I think, again, sometimes we feel like if we don't look like we have all the answers, that's going to upset them or cause them problems. But it's okay to be human and have those conversations with your kids and say, you know, like, so I've had a lot of, well, more than I would have liked to, conversations with my kids where I've had to say, like, so that thing that happened earlier, Mommy didn't handle that well. Mommy had a bad moment at work. Mummy was stressed out. Mummy hadn't had enough coffee, whatever it was. And like, let's talk about how could I have dealt with that better? And I'm really sorry that I yelled at you. And actually, let's talk about the fact that wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say like, oh, but I did this. And I'm like, I know, but I still shouldn't have shouted at you. You weren't perfect, but I was the one in the wrong. And, you know, sometimes as parents, we think, oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more than okay. It's important for our kids. We model
Absolutely.
for our kids how we manage emotions, don't we?
And so we've got to be really generous and flexible and gentle with ourselves, I think, in the next few weeks, both adults and children, in terms of prepping to get back to school and to start experiencing unlock. Kate, it's any final thoughts from you for tonight? It's been really, really wonderful again having you on the call, and so many pearls of wisdom.
No, I don't think so. I think my main message would be that, Will, it's about just for parents, sometimes the most important decision that you make for your children might be a decision that you make for yourself. And I think that's what I'm seeing most of all in parents right now, is people who are just trying so hard and who are doing a much better job than they realize, but who are exhausted. And maybe the most useful thing that you can do in preparing for your kids to go back to school is about thinking, when in the next 10 days am I going to get just a little bit of time out to go for a walk, or to sit on the back step with a cup of tea, or to write the list that I need to write, all the things that we can do that will help us. Because at the end of the day, you know, if you're supporting other people and you sink, you're not going to be able to keep them afloat either. So we do sometimes need to think about our priorities, and remember, not only is it okay to put ourselves first, but it's really important to do that.
So helpful. I guess my final gambit would probably be to try and keep your mind in sync with this sort of process of compassion beyond the day your children go back to school. I mean, I'm thinking actually this transition period is really important. So I would encourage people not just to think about sort of end date if it's all over, but actually we're going to need to really sort of handhold our children to a level through this first few weeks of term, probably into the Easter holidays, and to take that first phase of return as, if you like, a little bit of a gentle trial transition before we head into Easter, and then the summer term starts proper, and hopefully by then we will have made a lot of the transitions we need to make. But the key hope for me as always is be kind to yourselves, be compassionate, and also you're doing so much better than you think, because this is really difficult times. Kate, thank you so much. It's been great to spend another evening with you chatting, shooting the breeze on all sorts of things. If you found this video helpful, do hit subscribe, and we'll share these broadly, so hopefully people can get them through all networks. God bless you, everyone. Thanks for being with us this evening.